we need to look at charter schools and see why they're successful, and he mentioned the 17%, but apples to apples, these schools took those kids and got them to be 90% proficient. So we need to learn from that lesson, and I've seen it over and over again in the research I've done. But the reason why charter schools are successful is they're much freer from the regulation from the state, so they're much freer to just have the parent and the teacher and the school learning what to do, and they're free from some of the influence from the unions, quite frankly.
Emma?
If I may, just before I get to Emma, I just need to tell you that every teacher in that movie teaching in a charter school was a union member. They didn't tell you that. Every teacher in every charter school in that movie belonged to a teachers union.
Is that the case in New Hampshire?
No, not all teachers are unionized.
What was the answer?
No, not all teachers are unionized in New Hampshire.
In New Hampshire.
Right, not all teachers are
But
unionized.
are we very unique compared to the rest of the states, or what?
No, I think we're probably, there are two main teachers unions in the state. There's NEA, the National Education Association, and there's the AFT. Oh, so I think the American Federation of Teachers, and then there are those who are simply not affiliated with a union.
I'm sorry, the DC charter school? Those teachers are unionized?
Can we just let Emma answer?
Sorry, Emma.
I knew I shouldn't have sat at the end of the row. The fault I find with the film is that it presents charter schools as though they're the only alternative for helping kids succeed. And it doesn't show, it's not on?
Closer.
Oh, closer, I'm sorry. Just to repeat, the trouble I have with the film is that it shows charter schools as the only option for kids to succeed. Doesn't show successful teachers in successful schools. The KIPP teachers learned their rap technique from a public school teacher. And just in passing, they mentioned that 1 in 5 charters is good. There was research this summer that says charter school success is no more, no worse than public schools. They seem to be testing about the same on average. Some are better, some are not. But the real question is, I like the Superman image in this film, and the real question is, when are we all going to see ourselves as Superman, Superwoman? When are we all going to take responsibility for making our schools the very best they can be? And I'd like to think of that very specifically in terms of what's going to happen to school funding in this state. We have a majority elected now that wants to take away the kindergarten requirement, that wants to take away the new raised compulsory education attendance age to 18, which succeeded in lowering our dropout rate by 30%, which wants to cut state funding to our public schools. When are we going to take responsibility and make sure that every student in this state has a good opportunity for an excellent education?
I think Jim wants to comment.
Can we get it past Rick?
Yeah. That was great.
I tried.
I was there at the testimonies for SB 18 when they raised the mandatory age to 18, and it's sure you can lower dropout rates by requiring that you not drop out and stick around. That's not magic. You had a bunch of schools come in and testify that they had lowered their dropout rates by improving their programs, by having some of the techniques you saw here, and that was the key to lowering the dropout rate. And the legislature instead said, well, no, let's just raise the mandatory age. That wasn't the right answer by taking away that option. You have to improve the schools to keep people in, not just mandate that they stay in until 18. On the kindergarten thing, that was a mandate that was passed, unfunded mandate, which is illegal under Article 28A of the Constitution. The state can't pass unfunded mandates. The legislature did that anyway. And there was communities that had very thriving private kindergartens that the communities really loved. And those are getting put out of business because of that. The school funding issue. We're spreading our money around, the precious money, state money for school funding around to every single town. We've got donor towns coming back next year. We have to target our aid carefully rather than spreading it around and giving it to communities that are property tax rich.
Other question? Yes, the woman.
When you began the foundation school, because you wanted reading to be taught in a particular way, how do describe your school's approach to reading?
Well, I'm trained in the Orton-Gillingham approach, which simply teaches students the structure of the English language, and that shouldn't be a great aha as far as the teaching of reading. But when I was working in the public schools, and in the traditional public schools, and tried to get more of that available for students, I met with resistance. It's a specialized program, is what I heard. It's only for students with disabilities, is what I heard. And the only way I could prove that it really was helpful for all readers was to start a school like Strong Foundations. I didn't start out to start a charter school. When I called the Department of Ed and they told me that we would receive $3,725 per student, I asked Rob Tenney, how do they do that? And she said, I don't know. But I decided to start one anyway and figure it out as we went along. Now we receive half of what the traditional public schools receive, but we do it out of passion. I believe, as I hear this spirited debate, I believe that education is collaborative, and the reason for our existence is to share our reasons for success. I work in the traditional public schools, sharing some of our best practices a couple of days a week. And I see very dedicated teachers there. None of this could have happened if we hadn't started our charter school and made this more visible.
Okay. I think that the charter schools I've seen have been very successful, are indeed those exactly the ones who work collaboratively with the public schools. I think there's a charter school up the road in Merrimack Valley, in Pennacook, that does quite well, because there is that collaborative effort, and that's what does work. I agree with that 100%. But I just want to say one thing, is with the charter schools, the way they were designed for the innovation, they are not subject to the same rules and regulations as public schools. And when I go out and I talk to our members and I say, what do you experience in your classroom? We are making our public school teachers in your traditional public schools less creative. Less creative, because we require them to administer tests for students. Tests that, when they're taken out of context, are used against very good, highly qualified, very effective public school teachers. I spoke with some teachers in Manchester, and I said, how are you doing with the test? They said, this high-stakes testing is taking away our ability to reach students. In Manchester, I spoke with one teacher who spends 4 weeks a year in aggregate administering tests. 4 weeks a year administering tests and losing teaching time. That, I don't think, is where we need to go. But if you look at the film, when the maker of the film drives by those 3 public schools, and he says, I didn't want to send my children there because they're failing. He was asked later on by what criteria he judged those schools failing. And you know what he said? Tests. Test scores. With this heavy reliance on high-stakes testing, we are not improving the ability of students to learn. But we're certainly using the results that come from that, interpreting that for people's own particular agenda. It's not helping teachers. It's not helping public school students.
Jim?
I actually have to agree with Rick a little bit on this one.
You can agree with me 100%, you'd be right.
Yeah, No Child Left Behind has been awful. I mean, the teachers hate it, conservatives hate it, everybody hates it, and you know, they're teaching to the test, they're spending a lot of time on that, and they don't get immediate feedback. Whereas with the tests that were created in New Hampshire, what is it, the NECAPs, they get more immediate feedback and they can actually use it in the classroom. So there's a lot of studies on standards-based education.
It takes months.
It takes months to
It's
get
not
those
ending.
results.
Knee week.
Because it
talking
takes months.
NWEA?
Well, my son just got, yeah, okay,
NWEA.
yeah, because my son, I was just
Those are
comparing.
those are voluntary.
Okay, we just did those, and those were
Those are
actually.
voluntary,
Okay.
school to school, they're not required by the state.
Well, but my point is you're adding no child left behind requirements, all these other requirements for testing, and then if you want some useful testing done, you have to add it on top of all that other stuff, as opposed to letting the local school boards have some control over that.
So the gentleman is here in front.
Okay.
The testing was, in a way, a desperation measure to measure how well schools are doing. If you don't use that, what are you gonna use?
Right.
How do we judge whether a school is actually performing? How many of their children
If you don't
go
mind
to
if I finish my train of
the
thought.
high
on
school?
that. So in my mind, what we have to have, standards-based education has never worked. There's been no studies that show it works. What we need is to have parents in control to give them the opportunity to choose if that school's meeting their needs. If not, they get a tax credit or voucher where they can go to a different school or a charter school.
That doesn't solve the problem.
No, I still would support. If I were a parent, I'd want to see some testing. I'd want to know how they were doing. I'd want it to be a test that makes sense, that you get quick feedback and is a good test.
What criteria would Rick use?
Excuse me. I mean to grab that out of your hand, but I did. You can look at dropout rates. You can look at matriculation rates into college. Testing clearly is one component of it, but it certainly can't be the only thing. And when you rely so heavily on that, then you're doing a disservice to students.
Emma?
This is really a tough question, and we've been looking at it with the accountability system for the state. We're also looking at how you measure teacher effectiveness as a study for the state. And to find things that are, reliable, rigorous, then you have to start looking at numbers like test scores, dropout rates, how many go to college. But the thing is that education is really much more ineffable than that. So how do you measure creativity, social responsibility, responsiveness, compassion level? All of those things, to me, are part of a good education, but they're not measurable in the ways that we think of as scientifically rigorous.